Chapter 2. Establishment of East India Company. Reading objectives. Arrival of trading companies. Trade wars. The conquest of Bengal. Growth of British influence. Administrative policies of the Britishers. Case study. British rule. History is a chronological record of events, as of the life or development of people or institution, often including an explanation of or commentary on those events. In India, from the 16th century, European powers such as Portugal, Netherlands, France and the United Kingdom established their trading post. Ancient times looked how Romans had established trade relations with India. Similarly, Portuguese, English, French and Dutch also had come to India. Three major routes of India drew traders who chased it linked to Europe. One route passed through the Indian northwest border, reaching Central Asia, going across Russia and finally accessing the Baltic Sea. One more trade route was a land route via the Persian Gulf, moving to Turkey from Iraq, accessing Venice and Genoa by sea. There is a trade route that had been used for both land and sea. The route was via the Red Sea on the land for Alexandria's accessing Venice and Genoa by fairway. All over Europe, Europeans were busy in finding new ways to establish trade relations with India, for which they wanted to find an easy and secure trade route to India. Enrich yourself. All historians agree that the Portuguese explorer and adventurer Vasco da Gama was the first known European to reach India in 1498. It is believed that he had landed at Calicut, modern Kerala, in quest of spices and the famous calico, fine cotton, cloth. As the trade companies from France and England established their factories in the east of their countries, they called their trade companies by the term East India Company. So there were two East India Companies, the French and the English. Do you know? Provinces of India, earlier presidencies of British India and still earlier, presidency towns were the administrative divisions of British governance in the subcontinent. Collectively, they were called British India. In one form or other they existed between 1612 to 1947. Arrival of trading companies. Since the 17th century, trading companies from Portugal, Holland, England, France and Denmark started to set up their base in India. They established trading centers in various parts of the country, particularly in the coastal areas. These centers were called factories, not because there was production but because the company executives were called factors. The factories constituted warehouses to store tradable goods and offices from where officers could carry out business. These factories consisted of offices and godowns. Most of them also had the house of the officials and residential quarters for the merchants and traders who came for trade. Over the time, some factories were fortified. Trade wars. Gradually many traders from various European countries landed on the shores of India, as well as all of them had the same aim, to establish profitable trade links with India. They were always in conflict with each other. These led to wars, often termed as trade wars. The Portuguese eventually settled down to a very prosperous trade in spices with India. The Muslim rulers, including the Mughals, were averse to the idea of a foreign power carrying on commercial activities on the high seas bordering India. Goa, which had become a Portuguese bastion, subsequently, however, most of their Indian possessions were taken over by the Dutch and the British. The Dutch did not come to India at the same time as their other European competitors. Dutch East India Company was set up in 1602. They wanted to trade in spice in India, but they did not attempt to gain military power. The British set up the East India Company in 1600. Then William Hawkins met Emperor Jahangir to gain permission for trade and set up trade centers in Agra, Bhruch and Ahmedabad. In 1639, the British established Madras, which is now Chennai, and built Fort St. George there. Then Mughal Emperor Aurangzeb permitted the British to set up trade centers in Bengal, where they established Calcutta, now Kolkata, in 1690. They built Fort Williams in Calcutta. Mughal Emperor Farooq Siyar permitted British to trade in Orissa, Bengal and Bihar in 1717. Soon British gained power and uprooted the Portuguese, Dutch and French traders. The French formed French East India Company to compete with the British and the Dutch. It has come into force in 1664. With its headquarters in Pondicherry. The two trading companies, French East India Company and the English East India Company, were involved in three major wars in Tamil Nadu. These were the Carnatic Wars. These wars went on with breaks for nearly 2 decades, and at the end of these wars the English had won and the British rule began in India. First Carnatic War, 1744–48. The year 1740 was marked by the question of War of Succession. The British settlement of Madras, which was in the province of Karnataka, was captured by the French. The British in turn tried to attack Pondicherry. As the war was over in Europe, Madras was redeemed to British. Second Carnatic War, 1749–54. The second time the French and English were in conflict was when the point about succession of throne of Karnataka and Hyderabad came up. For the Carnatic throne, the two people fighting were Chanda Sahib, supported by the French forces, and Muhammad Ali, who was supported by English forces. For the Hyderabad throne, the two persons in conflict were Muzaffar-ung Nizam, supported by French, and Nasir Jung, supported by the English. Third Carnatic War, 1756–63. The final conflict between the French and the English did not last for long. In 1763, a peace treaty was signed between the French and the English. The English returned the French factory sites they have had occupied. But the English had set a condition that from then on the French factories would no longer be fortified centers. They were only allowed to engage in trade as all trade centers do. The conquest of Bengal. When the French forces and government backed out, the English forces became very ambitious. They started looking around for ways to establish their power. They had an eye on Bengal, which was the wealthiest Indian province. The English had already set up their trade post there in 1717. Ali Vardi Khan had ruled over Bengal from 1740 to 1756. He was a shrewd administrator and had kept a check on excess show of power and forces by European trading companies. When he died, his successor was Siraj-ud-Daulah, grandson of Ali Vardi Khan. Nawab Siraj-ud-Daulah was young and had no knowledge or experience about administering over a province. Many people took notice of this and plotted to claim his throne through secret plots. The eager observant English company found a way to engage themselves in the political game of Bengal. They had their trade center in Calcutta turned into fortified area. On observing this activity, Nawab Siraj-ud-Daulah ordered the French and English forces to defortify their trade centers. The French were ready to do so, but the English did not agree to the Nawab's word. Even by order they did not surrender the wealth they had taken from Dhaka treasury with unfair means. Siraj-ud-Daulah did not went to Bengal to meet a bad fate like Karnataka, so he sent his armed forces to take over Calcutta. The English were shocked at this turn of events. When they decided to dethrone Siraj-ud-Daulah, a war ensued. Battle of Plassey, 1757. On June 23, 1757 at Plassey, between Calcutta and Murshidabad, the forces of the East India Company under Robert Clive met the army of Siraj-ud-Daulah, the Nawab of Bengal. Clive had 800 Europeans and 2,200 Indian, whereas Siraj-ud-Daulah in his entrenched camp at Plassey was said to have 50,000 men with a train of heavy artillery. The aspirant to the Nawab's throne, Mir Jafar, was induced to throw in his lot with Clive, and by far the greater number of the Nawab's soldiers were bribed to throw away their weapons, surrender prematurely, and even turn their arms against their own army. Siraj-ud-Daulah was defeated. Battle of Plassey marked the first major military success for British East India Company. Mir Jafar, the plotting commander-in-chief, came to the throne of Bengal. Get to know more. French East India Company, 1664 to 1769 commercial enterprise was planned by Jean-Baptiste Colbert and chartered by King Louis XIV for the purpose of trading in the Eastern Hemisphere. By 1719, the company had established itself in India but near bankruptcy. With the decline of the Mughal Empire, the French found it necessary to intervene in India politically to protect their interests. Suffered defeat by Robert Clive in 1741. Despite its apparent success, the French company had never been able to maintain itself financially, and in 1769 it was abolished. Mir Jafar was appointed as Nawab of Bengal, but he was a puppet ruler. He held no power. He was directed as a puppet by the English. The English wielded more and more powers over Mir Jafar. When Mir Jafar could not yield much profit, they took him off Bengal's throne and placed Mir Qasim on the throne. Mir Qasim did what the English wished, and he granted the zamindari of Chittagong, Midnapur and Burdwan to the English. Gradually Mir Qasim tried to move away from English influence. He fired all courtiers who supported the English. He called in some European experts to come to Bengal and teach his forces the latest techniques of using weapons in warfare. By putting an end to duties on internal trade, he brought Indian and British merchants at par. This was a bold step on his part. Battle of Buxar, 1764. The English could not take such opposition of a subordinate who they had placed as a puppet on the throne of Bengal. They waged battles against Mir Qasim and defeated his forces. When Mir Qasim ran away from Bengal, he sought refuge in Awadh. In Awadh, he formed good relation with Shuja-ud-Daulah, the Nawab of Awadh. They both were further supported by the Mughal Emperor Shah Alam II. These three rulers combined their forces and fought the English forces at Buxar on the 22nd of October 1764. This was called the Battle of Buxar, which resulted in the defeat of the combined forces. Mir Qasim lost, so he was deposed from the Bengal throne, and Mir Jafar was given the throne of Bengal once again. The Battle of Buxar made it obvious to the English that the Indian provinces had weak armies. After this battle, Emperor Shah Alam II and Shuja-ud-Daulah had to rely on the English East India Company for their basic needs. Most of the finances required for English to expand their powers came from Bengal. Growth of British influence. The Battle of Buxar and Plassey had strengthened the English East India Company, which now practically owned Bengal. The revenues from Bengal went directly to the coffers of the company. The English controlled the army. Some of the collected revenue was paid to Mir Jafar, but the English held the wealth and the power. The Nawab of the Bengal, Mir Jafar, was held responsible for all activities but had no true power or control over the purse string. This arrangement was called dual or double government. This government caused hardship and utter misery to the common people in Bengal. The year 1770 witnessed a severe famine which was worsened by the dual government policy. The year 1772 saw the end of the dual government system in Bengal. English East India Company had direct control over Bengal. Warren Hastings, the new Governor-General from 1772 to 1785, made many changes to further strengthen English power to include more of India under it. Wars with Marathas and Mysore. The Marathas and the Kingdom of Mysore were always against the English, so they were always in conflict with English forces. The English and Marathas were engaged in the First Anglo-Maratha War from 1775 to 1782. This war was caused due to conflict over the throne of Peshwa. Madhav Rao II and Raghunath Rao were both competing for their claim over the Maratha throne. The Maratha chiefs lent support to Madhav Rao II along with his chief minister Nana Fadnvis. Raghunath Rao was backed by the English forces. The war ensued, but the result saw none of the side victorious. However, both the opponents maintained peace for the next 2 decades. The Marathas had grown weak by this time. The Third Anglo-Maratha War occurred in 1817. It brought the Maratha power to the ground. After the war, the Peshwa was exiled and sent to North India. There he was assigned a pension while the English took charge of the territories. Soon afterwards, the remaining Maratha chiefs also gave in and lost their armies and territories to the English. Subsidiary alliance. Lord Wellesley, who was made the Governor-General of India in 1798, brought 3 major policies into India to expand English power: subsidiary alliance, battles and wars, and forcibly claiming territories of previously defeated rulers. Of these 3 methodical policies, the subsidiary alliance was a remarkably effective one. The main features of this policy were: native rulers who become a subsidiary ally of the English would be protected by the company's gift against any foreign attack. In lieu of this guarantee, the native ruler had to maintain a force under British command and pay a subsidy for its maintenance to the company. The native ruler was forbidden to negotiate with any foreign power without the knowledge of the English. The first Indian ruler to sign the subsidiary alliance was the Nizam of Hyderabad. Punjab. The First Anglo-Sikh War was fought in 1845. The Khalsa forces were defeated by the English army. Yet the Sikhs did not accept the defeat. They got together as a united force to fight the English army in the Second Anglo-Sikh War in 1848. However, the Punjab army was captured and Punjab was annexed to the English in 1849. Searching dictionary. Warehouse. Go down where trade goods are stored. Factory. Trade centers of European countries. Trade company with officials called factors. Warehouse with goods and houses of officials in a fortified area. Heir. Person who legally inherits the wealth and property of kith and kin after their death. Doctrine of lapse. Lord Dalhousie, who becomes the Governor-General of India in 1848, started policy of doctrine of lapse. According to it, when the ruler of a region under English protection, subsidiary state, died, without a true heir, his territory would not automatically pass to an adopted heir. The throne would instead pass into the hands of the English, especially if the adopted heir's choice had not been confirmed by the English beforehand. The doctrine of lapse policy caused Surat, Udaipur, Bagha, Jatpur, Sambalpur, Nagpur, Thori and Satara to be annexed by the English. The Regulating Act of 1773. The Regulating Act of 1773 advised following steps to control the strength of the company. The Bengal Presidency was to be regulated by a Governor-General and a council including 4 councillors. There was to be a Supreme Court comprising of a Chief Justice and 3 other judges at Fort William with jurisdiction over all British subjects residing in Bengal. The company officials, including Governor-General, were to be paid salaries and they were not to take any gifts or reward from the Indians. Warren Hastings was appointed as the first Governor-General and Lieutenant General John Clavering, George Monson, Richard Barwell and Philip Francis were the 4 councillors. All officials were asked to surrender details of their properties earned. They were asked to place all documents of civil, military and revenue affairs of the company before the British government. However, the act failed because the power of the Governor-General and Council was not clearly spelled out. Thus it led often to controversies between them. The Supreme Court did not know whether it had to follow the British or Indian laws. The Governor of Bombay and Madras did not consider the supremacy of the Governor-General. Pitt's India Act, 1784. William Pitt, the Prime Minister of Britain, introduced the Pitt's Act in 1784 in order to overcome the shortcomings of the Regulatory Act. It had the following features: the work of trading had to be separated from the work of ruling India. A 6-man board of control from the Privy Council, headed by the Chancellor of the Treasury, was to be appointed. The Board of Control was to consist of the members appointed by the King. The appointment of officers in India was retained by the company subject to the King's overriding power to veto or remove. The Governor-General had the power to overrule his council. This came with an amendment in 1786. The Governor-General in Calcutta and his council was given absolute power with regard to foreign policy over the other presidencies in Bombay and Madras. This system of dual control between company and crown worked for the next 75 years, until the Indian Mutiny. After that, Parliament took over complete responsibility of India. The Charters Act of 1813 and 1833. The company's right to trade was based on the Royal Charter, which was renewed every 20 years. Gradually, restrictions were imposed upon the company through the Charter Acts of 1813 and 1833. The Charter Act of 1813 ended the trading monopoly of the company in Indian trade. Trade was open to all British subjects. The company kept its monopoly on trade in tea and its trade with China. The Charter Act of 1833 completely finished the company's trade monopoly because it was directed to close its commercial activities in India. The company became a mere administrative body under the supervision of the Board of Control. Case study: positive and negative effects of British rule in India. India was under British colonial rule from 1857 till 1947. Although British rule mostly impacted the nation negatively, there were positive effects too that helped India in some way. Positive effects of British colonial rule. Job opportunities. British rule in India made many job opportunities available for the Indian locals. There were many options for joining the military, as daily labourers, drivers, servants for Britishers and later the Indian civil services to earn during the British rule. Infrastructure development. Britishers during their rule did a lot of work in building roads, hospitals, schools and other infrastructural projects in India. While most of these developments were for their selfish interests, these developments did help in making life easier to some extent for Indians. New ideas and introduction to new avenues. Although largely for their self-interests, Britishers introduces some great avenues like Indian railways were introduced by them primarily to ship raw materials to Britain. Also, they introduced Indian postage system and abolished outdated custom like sati, widow marriage, and child marriage. Stable economy. The British kept the uniform tax rules throughout their time in India, which helped in stabilizing the economy, unlike many Indian rulers who increased their revenues as for and when they needed. Safety. British rule protected India from all the enemies. It provided a safety net from the invasion of traditional enemies like Afghanistan, Persia and other Western countries. Opportunity on foreign land. British rule in India gave the chance to rich Indian for availing opportunities of higher studies in the West. Few Indians used this excellent chance to study in Britain, including Mahatma Gandhi. Negative effects of British rule. No decision making. During British rule, India had no decision making or political power in any field. Indian lost its self-identity and became slave to Britishers. Ruined harmony. British used divide and rule policy. While Indians fought with each other, Britishers used the opportunity to conquer Indian states to extend their political influence. Religious differences. Britishers started the hatred of communism between the Hindus and Muslims of India, which later led to the division of country into India and Pakistan. High taxation. The British Raj declined the Indian handicrafts by raising the tax. Indian trade struggled with high taxation. No economic growth. India made zero growth economically during Britishers' rule from 1857 to 1947, as there were no opportunities for growth. Freedom is unmatched now. India is developing. Word to know. For centuries India had maintained successful trade relations with Europe. The French and the English were enemies in a way due to many social and political reasons. The Second Carnatic War was won by the English forces. The Battle of Plassey marked a major turn in Indian history. The Battle of Buxar made it obvious to the English that the Indian provinces had weak armies. The Marathas and Mysore were always against English, so they were always in conflict with English forces. In 1798, Lord Wellesley was made the Governor-General of India. Lord Dalhousie became Governor-General of India in 1848.